H.R. 5013, the Improved Acquisition Act of 2010. First, I want to thank Chairman Skelton and Ranking Member McKeon for the trust and confidence they placed in the Defense Acquisition Reform Panel. I want to give special thanks and accommodation to my good friend Rob Andrews for the hard work that he did in leading this effort. He led it very, very well. He proved once and for all that we can start meetings on time and get our work done, even if those meetings start at 8 a.m. in the morning. And so I enjoyed this work with Rob. He and I may not agree on certain things, but in this arena and most things on the armed services, we're pretty good agreement, and on this work, full agreement. And I want to appreciate and tell him thank you very much for the good work and his commitment to making this thing work. The panel truly did approach its work on a nonpartisan basis. In fact, if you were to read the transcripts of the hearings and read the questions without the names attached, you could not tell or could not distinguish between a Republican question or a Democratic question. And I think that speaks volumes for the way that most work on the Armed Services Committee occurs, and in particular the work of our panel. And I was very proud to be a part of that and to lend my efforts. I also want to thank Chairman Skelton and Ranking Member McKeon for their generous praise for Rob and me. But I would be remiss if I don't also acknowledge the other dedicated members of the panel, Jim Cooper, Duncan Hunter, Brad Ellsworth, Mike Kaufman, and Joe Sistak. This bill, as Rob said, bears many fingerprints, but the 7 of us have the most fingerprints on it, and I want to thank my colleagues for the work that they've done. Also want to thank the staff. They did an outstanding job, Andrew Hunter and Janess Simler, who made this work, put this together, did the heavy drafting, and the staff out of my office, Serge Marsoff, for the great job that they did in making this work product come together as quickly as it did. As ranking member of the panel on defense acquisition, I can attest that H.R. 5013 will truly be instrumental in reforming the bill, informing the full range of the defense acquisition system. I believe this bill will improve the way we measure value in acquisition. It will create a more responsive requirements process, and it will sustain the acquisition workforce, and it will manage certain elements of the acquisition system. My colleague, Mr. Andrews, has talked at length about the reforms the bill implements, but I would like to speak to one that's a little dearer to my heart, that's a little less obvious, but no less important, provision that plays a critical role in improving the financial management practices of the Department of Defense and provides incentives to achieve an unqualified audit opinion for all of the Department of Defense. The publication of a clean audit, or an unqualified audit of DOD, would finally give the American people the confidence that their tax dollars are in fact being accounted for and spent wisely in the defense of this great nation. Since 1990, there's been a requirement for the federal government to publish audited financial statements, but the federal government is not in compliance with that federal law. A large share of the responsibility for this circumstance rests with the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense is the largest agency in the federal government, owning about 86% of the government's assets, estimated at $4.6 trillion. Over the last 2 decades, money has been spent by the Department of Defense in an unsuccessful quest to obtain auditable financial statements. There have been good people working very hard on this issue for a long, long time. Good people today in the Department of Defense who are working hard at this issue, but we're not there yet. We've got a lot of work to go. Quite frankly, we cannot allow these past failures and past unsuccessful efforts to deter us from the heavy lift that's ahead of us to get this job done. I'm a CPA, and I used to audit entities, and I'm fully aware of how hard this is. It is not an easy task, but it is possible and it's necessary to implement the financial control systems necessary to generate auditable financial statements. This bill ensures that DOD is no longer held to a separate standard from the public business and the rest of government. The reliability of financial data is crucial to improve acquisition outcomes. Without understanding where the money is being spent or understanding what assets it owns, there will not be the proper accountability for acquisition costs or new requirements. Perhaps every dime is in fact being well spent, but we don't know that, the Department of Defense doesn't know that, and the taxpayer doesn't know that. Financial accountability must continue to be a high priority. If correctly implemented, this legislation will allow America's tax dollars to be stretched further and will have a substantial impact on reducing waste, fraud, and abuse. I applaud the panel and the Armed Services Committee for adopting these recommendations and encourage each of the components of the Department of Defense to take full advantage of the incentives provided in this bill to accelerate the auditability of the financial statements of the Department of Defense. Again, I want to thank my colleague Rob Andrews for the hard work he did in moving this forward by his strength of will. In closing, I look forward to the progress of this legislation will allow, and I encourage my colleagues to vote for this bill later on this afternoon. And I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman